unsettling feeling when something's not quite right, but you can't figure out exactly what it is? It's like the air itself shifts, pressing in on you, making it hard to breathe. That's how I felt last night. The kind of fear that doesn't make sense, but you can't ignore it. I was just relaxing in my living room, scrolling through my phone, waiting for a friend to arrive. He'd texted me earlier, saying he was on his way, but time was crawling. Every glance at the clock made my impatience grow. Finally, the doorbell rang. A wave of relief washed over me. He was here. I jumped up from the couch and rushed to the front door. The hallway light above flickered weakly, casting dim shadows on the floor. But when I opened the door, expecting to see him standing there with his usual grin, there was no one. My heart skipped a beat as I stepped outside. The porch was empty, the air still. I peered left and right, but saw no one. That's when I noticed something strange. A shadow, but not quite a shadow. It was more like a smudge, an outline that didn't belong. It wasn't clear like the shape of a person, just a dark smear against the ground. My heart raced, and I quickly told myself it was nothing. Maybe the light was playing tricks on me, or maybe I was just tired. But when I said hello into the silence, my voice echoed back at me, empty and lonely. No response. The door next door was shut, and the corridor was still. I told myself to relax, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I closed the door and locked it behind me. Then, as I turned to walk back into the living room, I heard it. 3 soft knocks. A gentle tap on the wall. The knocks were spaced out, deliberate, and they came from the far side of the room, where there was no way someone could be. My heart thudded painfully in my chest as I stood frozen, listening for any sign of what had caused them. I cautiously walked toward the living room, checking the... Everything was in place, no sign of anyone, no signs of forced entry. But the air felt different, colder than before. Goosebumps prickled on my skin. Was the AC on? No, it was set to the same temperature as always. I rubbed my arms to warm myself, but the coldness lingered. Suddenly there was a soft draft brushing past the back of my neck, but all the windows were shut. Nothing was moving. My breath quickened. It was as though the very air was pressing in on me. I turned to check the door again, thinking maybe my friend had arrived or was waiting outside. The hallway light was still dim, and the shadow, that strange outline, was there again, only now it looked even closer to the door. It seemed to shift, like it was following me. My stomach tightened with unease. I dared to peer through the peephole, but the hallway was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I opened the door just a little, only to find that the shadow hadn't moved far, but it was definitely closer to me now. My mind raced. What was going on? Was it just a trick of my tired mind, or something else? I quickly closed the door again, locking it behind me. The chill in the room was becoming unbearable, but I couldn't figure out why. I checked every room in my apartment, from the kitchen to the bedroom. Everything was in order. Nothing was out of place. But when I returned to the living room, I heard a scraping sound, a quiet, eerie, dragging noise, like fabric brushing against the floor. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The noise stopped as soon as I turned. Was it my imagination? Maybe an animal had gotten into the vents. My skin crawled as I reached for my phone. No messages, no missed calls, just a text from my friend saying he was running late. I typed a reply but hesitated to send it. Something felt wrong, like I shouldn't break the silence. Suddenly, the light overhead flickered and my heart skipped. The knocks earlier, was I just imagining things? I glanced once more through the peephole. The shadow was still there, and now it looked even bigger. Something wasn't right. I turned on a lamp in the living room, hoping the light would offer some comfort. But even with the room brighter, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I heard a faint tapping sound, not from the door, but from the window. It was almost as if someone, or something, was out there, watching. I walked over, lifted the curtain, and peeked outside. There was nothing there. The tapping stopped, but the feeling of being watched, that lingered. As I stood there in the silence, my thoughts raced. Was I alone? Or had something followed me into my home? The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a few cars. I spotted my neighbor's sedan parked in its usual spot, and the streetlights cast a dull glow over the scene. It seemed calm, no one loitering around. But then I heard it, the scraping sound again. This time, it came from behind me, from the living room. I spun around, quickly pulling the curtain shut. As I turned, I noticed a faint ripple in the reflection of the TV screen, as if something had passed in front of it. But there was nothing there. My breath hitched in my chest, and I exhaled slowly, trying to calm myself. My eyes remained locked on the screen, searching for any movement, but nothing. I turned my head quickly to check behind me, but again, there was nothing. My legs felt like lead, so I sank back onto the couch, my body tense, my hands trembling. The living room was unnervingly quiet, with only the hum of the refrigerator breaking the silence. I tried focusing on that hum, hoping it would calm me, but my thoughts were scattered. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe my friend was pranking me somehow. But how would he manage a prank like this? And I had locked the door. I kept telling myself it was just nerves or an overactive imagination. But deep down, my senses screamed that something else was in the apartment with me. I stood up, checking the door again, making sure it was locked tight. I even slid the chain into place. I pressed my ear against the door, listening intently. The hallway was silent. Then, I heard it, a faint shuffle coming from the bedroom. My heart skipped a beat. I had already checked the bedroom, and it was fine. But the noise was unmistakable. I hurried down the short hallway toward the bedroom, my pulse racing. I turned on the light and scanned the room. The bed was undisturbed, the dresser drawers were closed, and the closet door was shut. But then I heard it, a faint creak from the corner near the window. The floorboard. I was sure of it. I turned to face the corner, but it was empty. The curtains were drawn, and there was no one hiding there. Still, the creaking sound persisted. I stepped closer and pressed my foot against the floorboard. It shifted slightly, making the same sound. Maybe it was just the wood settling. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. Sweat beaded on my forehead. I left the bedroom light on and headed back to the living room. But as I passed through the hallway, I thought I saw a shifting shape near the front door. It was low to the ground, almost blending with the shadows. I stopped, my breath caught in my throat. It didn't move, but I knew it was there. I was frozen in place, my mind screaming at me to turn away, to not engage with whatever it was, but I couldn't ignore it. Slowly, I took a step forward. The shape recoiled slightly, as if it was retreating. My pulse thundered in my ears. I took another step, and it seemed to fade into the darkness near the door. I rushed back to the living room, flipping on every light. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and dialed my friend's number. It went straight to voicemail. I left a shaky message. "Dude, where are you? I need you to call me right now." I sat back down, trying to steady my breathing. My legs bounced restlessly. My hands wouldn't stay still. The room felt like it was closing in on me, and every little sound made me jump. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. After what felt like an eternity, I couldn't just sit there anymore. I decided to grab my jacket and wait outside for my friend. At least in the hallway, I could see if anyone approached. If that shadow was still out there, I'd deal with it in the open. I stood up and carefully made my way to the front door. I looked through the peephole one last time. The corridor light flickered weakly, and the shadow was right in front of my door. It wasn't a shape, just a smudge of darkness, with no clear edges. My heart raced. I didn't want to open the door, not with that right outside, but I couldn't stay in here with whatever was making those noises. My hands shook as I reached for the doorknob. I took a deep breath, unlatched the chain, and turned the key. The door creaked open, and the corridor light buzzed softly. The shadow pulled back a few inches. I stood in the doorway, watching it. I could see it more clearly now. It didn't have any edges or features. It was a black blur, absorbing the light around it. My head spun. None of this made any sense. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I stepped forward, one foot out the door. The shadow shifted cautiously, moving a little farther down the hallway. I held my breath and took another step. Then it flickered once and disappeared. I stood there, staring at the spot where it had been. The hallway was empty now, just the worn carpet and the dim corridor light. I walked up and down, checking every corner, but it was gone. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. I went back inside, closed the door, and locked it. The apartment felt ice cold again. I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my friend. Sorry, got held up. Coming in 5. I stared at the screen, unsure how to explain everything that had just happened. I typed back, telling him I'd meet him downstairs. I didn't want to stay in that apartment for another second. I grabbed my jacket and wallet, walking through each room to make sure the lights were off, except for the living room lamp. I locked the door behind me and made my way down the hallway, checking over my shoulder. The shadow was gone, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that it was nearby, watching. My heart pounded in my chest as I walked away. I pressed the elevator button and glanced back at my door, half expecting to see something, anything, but nothing appeared. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside. As the ride down began, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the stainless steel walls, a sweaty, nervous face staring back at me. I tried to steady my breath, inhaling slowly, but my hands were still shaking. My mind replayed every eerie sound, every moment of that unsettling presence. I didn't know what it was, but I felt it deep in my bones. It had been real. When the elevator doors opened to the lobby, the normal sights and sounds of the building eased some of my fear. The bright lights and random chatter from a few neighbors made me feel less alone. I forced a small smile at the security guard, but he just nodded back, unaware of the turmoil I was feeling. I stood near the entrance, checking my phone and waiting for my friend to arrive. My heart was still racing, and a chill lingered in the air, a reminder of the fear I couldn't shake. I kept expecting to see that shadow creeping up behind me, but it never appeared. I still couldn't explain what happened, but I knew one thing for sure. Something had gotten into my place, unseen and undetected. It left no trace but the cold, strange sounds. The shape it took wasn't a shape at all. Even now, as I stood there, I wasn't sure how I'd ever walk back into that apartment without remembering the knocks or the way it lingered near my feet. But I had to go back. It was my home, and I couldn't abandon it. Yet that feeling of being watched, it wasn't going away anytime soon. The night passed uneventfully, but something still gnawed at me. I heard footsteps that first night, heavy and measured, as though someone was pacing back and forth. I stopped what I was doing and listened, but there was no voice, no sign of anyone else. My heart raced in my chest. I was alone, or so I thought when I checked the guest book and saw my name printed on the only line. I had driven to the chalet to clear my mind and work on a new story. It was deep in the mountains, far from the crowds, the noise, and the traffic. The exterior looked worn, with a few cracks in the windows, and the trees surrounding the building blocked most of the sunlight. But in the isolation, I found peace. I was expecting silence. The caretaker had given me the key with a simple explanation that the place was all mine. I appreciated the solitude, and that first evening, I cooked a small dinner in the chalet's tiny. The counters were old but clean enough, and the faucet dripped a little, but I ignored it. I sat at the narrow table near the window, trying to relax. When the temperature dropped in the evening, I moved to the living room and turned on the old radiator. I opened my laptop to work, but the slow internet connection frustrated me. So I shut it and decided to go to bed. I chose the bedroom on the ground floor. It was closer to the bathroom, and I felt more comfortable there. The other bedrooms were upstairs, but the caretaker had mentioned the top floor hadn't been used in a while. The bed creaked when I lay down, and I stared at the dark ceiling, wondering how old the chalet really was. There was a faint smell of dust and old wood, but it wasn't too strong. Eventually, I fell asleep. Around the middle of the night, I woke to a distinct thumping sound. My eyes snapped open, and I lay there for a few seconds, trying to figure out if it was a branch hitting the side of the chalet or perhaps an animal scurrying outside. But the noise changed. It turned into heavy footsteps, stomping across the floor above me. My mouth went dry. I sat up in bed, holding my breath. There was no reason for anyone else to be there. I slid out of bed and walked to the doorway, flicking on the overhead light. The light buzzed for a second before lighting up the small bedroom. The footsteps continued, stomping back and forth above me. Part of me wanted to call the caretaker, but my phone had no signal, and the chalet's landline was in the living room. I figured I'd check it out first. Maybe it was just the house settling. But it didn't sound like that. I moved slowly down the hall, passing the bathroom. The living room was dark, lit only by the glow of a small lamp I had left on earlier. The radiator hummed softly. I stood there, trying to pinpoint the direction of the footsteps. They were definitely upstairs. They paused, then started again, crossing the floor overhead. My hands felt clammy as I wiped them on my pajama pants. My heart pounded in my chest. I approached the staircase, the rough wood banister cold under my palm. Each step creaked as I moved up, my breath shallow. The footsteps above me didn't stop. They just kept going. There was something in the air that made my skin prickle, like static electricity. I kept climbing, one step at a time. Part of me wanted to turn back, but I felt compelled to keep going, as if I needed to prove to myself that no one was up there. At the top of the stairs, I stood in a narrow hallway with 2 doors on each side and a larger door at the end. The hallway light flickered dimly above me. The footsteps sounded closer now, coming from the far room on the left. I walked toward it, feeling the floorboards flex beneath my feet. The door was slightly ajar, so I pushed it open. The room was empty, just a dusty bed frame, a window facing the mountains, and a small dresser. The footsteps paused for a second. I waited for them to resume. Then I heard them above my head, on the roof or in the attic. I looked up, but there was just the ceiling with a single light fixture. No attic door, no ladder, nothing that would allow someone to climb up there. Then came the noise again, thud, 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 moving across the ceiling. I stepped back into the hallway, a cold shiver running down my arms. The caretaker hadn't mentioned an attic. The noise felt distinct, like it was guiding me somewhere. I glanced around the hallway, looking for any access panel, but there was nothing. I spotted a small hatch in the ceiling near the end of the hallway, almost flush with the plaster. It was square, maybe a couple of feet on each side. I hadn't noticed it during my first walkthrough, and there was no visible handle, just a small crack. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to decide if I should open it in the middle of the night. After a few moments of hesitation, I reached for a wooden chair that stood against the wall. I dragged it under the hatch, the wood scraping loudly against the floor. I climbed on top, wobbling slightly. The hatch was high enough that I could only reach it with my fingertips, so I pushed it. It gave way slightly, and dust and debris fell on my face, making me cough. I steadied myself and pushed the hatch open wider. Cold air rushed out, carrying with it a stale, musty smell, like old paper and forgotten boxes. I peered inside but could barely see anything. Hesitantly, I reached my hand up, half expecting something to grab it, but only feeling the rough edges of wooden beams. The footsteps I had heard earlier stopped as soon as I opened the hatch. My scalp tingled, and my breath became shallow. I knew I was about to climb into a dark, cramped space without a flashlight, but I couldn't turn back now. I had to know what was up there. I climbed down and went to the nearest bedroom. A small nightstand next to the bed had an old flashlight that flickered once before turning. Back at the hatch, I shone the beam inside, cutting through layers of dust. The flashlight revealed wooden boards across a narrow space, probably an attic. I grabbed the edges of the opening and used all my strength to pull myself up. My arms strained, and I scraped my elbow on a splinter, letting out a sharp hiss. But I pushed through, eventually getting my upper body through and twisting until I could pull my legs inside. The attic was pitch black, except for the beam of my flashlight. I shone it around and saw piles of old newspapers, boxes stacked in the corners, and thick cobwebs hanging from the beams. The ceiling slanted, following the roof's shape, and I had to stoop to avoid hitting my head on the rafters. The floor felt rough under my feet. I took a few tentative steps forward, the beam of the flashlight trembling in my hands. The footsteps I had heard earlier were gone, and the attic was silent except for my breathing. My pulse raced, and my hands shook slightly as I scanned the room. I inched further, stepping around boxes and loose boards. The attic wasn't large but was filled with clutter. I called out, "Hello!" My voice echoed hollowly, but there was no response. I stood there, considering the possibility that I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe it was just the wind or the house settling. Just as I was about to turn and head back down, I caught sight of something in the far corner of the attic, a narrow gap in the wall. It looked like a small door or panel. Curiosity tugged at me as I carefully stepped over broken boards and approached it. The panel was made of a different kind of wood than the rest of the walls and had a latch, but no lock. My heart raced in my chest, and I felt a cold sweat on the back of my neck. I lifted the latch, and the panel swung open, revealing a cramped storage space behind the attic wall. My flashlight illuminated a narrow gap with no real flooring, just insulation and beams. At the far end of the space was a large trunk, covered in a thick layer of dust. I stared at it, wondering why it was there. The footsteps had led me to this point, but now they were gone. Still, my nerves were on edge, and the hair on my arms stood up. I carefully crossed a beam and knelt next to the trunk. The hinges were rusty, but they moved when I lifted the lid. Inside, I saw old clothes, some wooden carvings, and a stack of faded pictures. The smell was damp and stale. I reached for one of the pieces of cloth, moving it aside. Underneath, I found what looked like a journal with a cracked leather cover. I opened it, and the pages were yellowed. The handwriting was hard to read in the dim light, but I could make out some dates from decades ago. My eyes skimmed a few lines. The entries mentioned someone hearing noises in the chalet at night, along with the sound of footsteps overhead, just like what I had heard. My stomach churned with unease. I felt an urgent need to get out of that cramped space. I closed the trunk, left the panel open, and quickly turned around. That's when I heard it, a soft creak, like something shifting on a beam behind me. My chest tightened and I froze. I swung the flashlight around, but there was nothing. The beam caught something reflective near the trunk, a piece of broken glass leaning against the side. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My body was tense and my breathing was rapid. I carefully made my way back to the hatch, nearly stumbling on a loose board. As I lowered my legs through the opening, I could see the hallway light shining up from below. The light was a comfort. I climbed down the chair and back into the hallway. My face and arms were covered in dust, and my shirt clung to my skin from sweat. I felt like I needed a shower, but also wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything. The footsteps had led me to that hidden panel. But why had they stopped? I flipped the hallway light switch on and off, testing it, still on. Then I closed the hatch, pushing it back into place until it clicked. There was no lock or latch from below, so I grabbed the chair and set it aside. The corridor felt quiet now, almost too quiet. I returned to the empty bedroom where I had first heard the footsteps. The room looked ordinary under the overhead light, just the bed frame, the dresser, and the window with a view of the dark mountains. Everything seemed normal. I walked back down the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. My knees felt shaky, the fear and adrenaline slowly wearing off. In the living room, I placed the flashlight on the table and sank into the old couch. The cushions sank under me, and I realized just how exhausted I was. I didn't want to think about what could be walking around upstairs, but it lingered in my mind. I checked the time on my phone. It was nearly 3 in the morning, and still no signal. I glanced at the landline phone on the desk nearby. The caretaker's number was written on a small card next to it. For a moment, I considered calling, but then the thought seemed pointless. I wasn't sure what I had heard, and I didn't want to sound like a frightened guest spooked by old house noises. Instead, I decided to stay on the couch for the rest of the night. I grabbed a blanket from my bedroom, pulled it over me, and tried to doze off. But my mind kept returning to the footsteps. They had a deliberate rhythm, as though someone was pacing with a purpose. I couldn't forget the dusty trunk in the attic or the journal that mentioned similar footsteps. Footsteps someone else had heard, maybe years ago. But there was no explanation in the journal, just a brief mention of the noises. I wondered if there were more details deeper within, but I was too drained to climb up there again. I lay there on the couch, my eyes darting around the room, scanning every shadow, waiting for another sound. The night passed slowly. The radiator hummed, and I jumped at every small creak the chalet made. My heart raced whenever I thought I heard something move above me. Eventually, the first hints of dawn lightened the windows. I sat up, feeling stiff and unrested. The footsteps hadn't returned that night, but the feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. I wasn't alone in this place. That morning, I made some coffee, my hands trembling slightly as I poured water into the machine. Standing by the window, I gazed out at the mountains, my mind drifting back to the attic. The presence I felt seemed to want me to find something. Maybe it was the trunk, or maybe there was more hidden up there. I planned to check again after some coffee and a moment to steady my nerves. I had come to the chalet to write, but now I felt stuck in a mystery that made my pulse race. My next move was clear. I had to return upstairs in the daylight, armed with better lighting and a clearer head. Whatever it was, those footsteps didn't feel like random house noises. They felt personal, like they were meant for me to follow. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face it, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. Something in that chalet was calling me, step by step, and I had to find out why. I never expected to see my own face in an old portrait, but that's exactly what happened one Saturday at a local antique fair. As I walked through rows of dusty furniture, chipped tea sets, and worn-out books, something caught my eye. The painting hung on a makeshift wooden wall under a flickering light. The vendor told me it had no real story attached, but the resemblance was obvious. The man in the painting looked like me, though his clothes belonged to a much older time. His hair was styled differently, and his posture was stiff, like he was posing for an official portrait. I couldn't look away. I bought it on the spot and took it home. I didn't think it would change my life, but it did. When I got home, I placed the painting in the middle of my living room. I moved a few of my usual decorations to fit it on the wall opposite my couch. At first, everything seemed normal. It was just an antique painting, a little faded with a dark wooden frame. The vendor had said it was at least a century old. I didn't question it. Maybe it was a coincidence, but something about the resemblance bothered me. That first night, I turned off the lights around 11 p.m. My living room windows faced the street, and I had a street lamp right outside. Light filtered through the gaps in my blinds, and I kept glancing at the painting because I couldn't sleep. There was a faint sheen in the painted eyes. At first, I thought it was just the streetlight reflecting off the varnish, but when I got closer, the eyes seemed to glimmer. A slight rush of tension hit my stomach, but I brushed it off. A few nights passed without major incidents, but I found myself looking at the painting before bed. There was something about it that made me uneasy. My palms felt clammy whenever I was close to it. At night, the eyes had a strange depth. The man in the painting wore a dark jacket with a stiff collar, and his expression was neutral, neither happy nor sad. But sometimes, when I blinked or when the room lighting changed, I swore his mouth had shifted. On Wednesday night, I was certain I saw his lips curve into a slight smirk. It was so subtle that I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I turned on all the lights in the living room to double-check, but the expression looked normal again. I tried to shrug it off as my mind messing with me, but by Friday I began to feel strange just walking past it. The painting had a stiff energy during the day, but at night it felt more intense. Around midnight on Friday, I lay on the couch struggling with insomnia. The faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing outside were the only sounds. I caught myself staring at the painting. The eyes seemed to watch me. I rubbed my own eyes, realizing I was holding my breath. I tried to calm myself. I got up for a glass of water, hoping the motion would break the uneasy feeling. After drinking some water, I stepped back into the living room. A chill ran through me. My hair stood on end. I could have sworn the man in the painting winked at me. It was so fast, I almost doubted it, but my heart pounded and my mouth went dry. A warm flush crept up my neck. I told myself it was just an illusion caused by the flickering streetlight outside. I tried not to think about it, but I ended up lying awake for another hour, staring at the ceiling, feeling restless. Over the next few days, I developed a subtle dread about going into my own living room. On Monday, I tried to work from home. My desk was in the corner of the room, so I couldn't avoid seeing the painting. Around noon, sunlight poured in through the windows. The portrait's expression appeared normal. The background was a dark, brownish color. The face was pale, with fine brushstrokes around the cheekbones. The eyes were a dark greenish brown, and the eyebrows had a slight arch. While typing on my laptop, I felt as if someone was watching me. I turned around and stared at the painting. It looked unchanged, but I felt a strange pressure in my chest. My breathing grew shallow, and I felt my fingers tremble. I told myself to ignore it. That evening, I tried to unwind with a few episodes of a comedy show, but I couldn't focus. My attention kept drifting to the painting. The corners of his mouth looked different again. This time, it was a slight downturn, almost like a frown. I paused the show, got up, and walked over to it. I leaned in close. The brushstrokes around his lips didn't seem any different, but the expression had definitely shifted. It felt impossible for it to change on its own, but it did. My skin crawled. I decided to cover the painting with an old blanket. As soon as I did, I let out a long exhale. My shoulders relaxed, and I left it covered for 2 days. During that time, I slept better, but part of me kept thinking about it. On Thursday afternoon, curiosity got the best of me. I removed the blanket. It was broad daylight, so I felt safer. I stood there studying the painting. It looked static again. The man's face was neutral, and I thought maybe I had exaggerated everything in my mind. So I decided to keep it uncovered, just to prove I could handle it. That night, the tension returned. Around 10 p.m., I walked through the living room and glanced at the painting. It seemed unchanged at first, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me. The room was darker now, and the air felt thicker. I wasn't sure how much longer I could ignore it. It was nearly 3 a.m. when I checked the time again, but still no signal. I glanced at the landline phone on the desk nearby. The caretaker's number was written on a small card beside it. I considered calling, but it felt pointless. I wasn't even sure what I had heard. I didn't want to sound like a frightened guest spooked by the usual creaks of an... I decided to stay on the couch for the rest of the night. I grabbed a blanket from my bedroom, pulled it over me, and tried to relax. But my mind kept returning to the footsteps. They had a deliberate rhythm, like someone pacing with purpose. I couldn't forget the dusty trunk or the journal, which mentioned hearing footsteps just like mine, perhaps by someone else years ago. There was no explanation, only a short note. I wondered if there was more in the journal, but at that moment, I was too exhausted to go back up and find out. I lay on the couch, eyes darting around the room, scanning every shadow, waiting for another sound. The night dragged on slowly. The radiator hummed, and I jumped at every creak the chalet made. My heart raced whenever I thought I heard something move upstairs. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the windows, I sat up, stiff and unrested. The footsteps hadn't returned, but the feeling of not being alone remained. I made myself coffee, noticing my hands trembling slightly as I poured the water into the machine. Standing by the window, gazing at the mountains, my thoughts drifted back to the attic. The presence I had felt seemed to want me to find something. Maybe the trunk, or perhaps something else hidden up there. I decided I'd check again after some caffeine. I was there to write, but now I was stuck in a mystery that made my pulse race. My next move was clear. Return upstairs in the daylight, with better lighting and a clearer mind. The footsteps hadn't felt like random noises. They felt personal, like they were meant for me to follow. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face it, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. Something in that chalet was calling me, step by step, and I had to find out why. One Saturday, I went to a local antique fair. I walked through rows of dusty furniture, chipped tea sets, and worn books when I spotted it. The painting hung on a makeshift wall under a flickering... The vendor claimed it had no real backstory, but the resemblance was undeniable. The man in the picture looked like me, though his clothes were from an older time. His hair was styled differently, and his posture was stiff, like he was posing for an official portrait. I couldn't look away. I bought it on the spot and took it home, not thinking it would change my life, but it did. I placed the painting in the living room, moving some of my decorations to fit it on the wall opposite the couch. At first, everything seemed normal, just an antique painting, a little faded, with a dark wooden frame. The vendor had said it was at least a century old. It was strange how much it resembled me, but I didn't question it. That first night, I turned off the lights around 11 p.m. My living room windows faced the street, and a street lamp outside cast light through the gaps in the blinds. I kept glancing at the painting, unable to sleep. There was a faint gleam in the painted eyes. At first I thought it was just the reflection of the street, but when I got closer, the eyes seemed to glimmer. A rush of tension hit my stomach, but I brushed it off. A few nights passed without much happening, but I found myself looking at the painting before bed. There was something about it that made me uneasy. My palms felt clammy when I was close to it, At night, the eyes seemed to have a strange depth. The man's expression was neutral, neither happy nor sad, but sometimes when I blinked or when the room lighting changed, I swore his mouth had shifted. By Wednesday night, I was sure I saw his lips curve into a slight smirk. It was so subtle that I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I turned on all the lights in the living room to check, and the expression looked normal again. I tried to shake it off as my mind messing with me, but by Friday I started feeling strange just walking past it. During the day, the painting felt stiff, but at night it felt more intense. Around midnight on Friday, I lay on the couch, struggling with insomnia. The refrigerator hummed softly and cars passed outside. I caught myself staring at the painting. The eyes seemed to watch me. I rubbed my eyes, realizing I was holding my breath. I tried to calm myself. I got up for a glass of water, hoping to break the uneasy feeling. After drinking, I stepped back into the living room. A chill ran down my spine. I could have sworn the man in the painting winked at me. It was so fast that I almost doubted it, but my heart pounded and my mouth went dry. A warm flush crept up my neck. I told myself it was an illusion, caused by the flickering streetlight. I tried not to think about it, but I ended up lying awake for another hour, restless. Over the next few days, I developed a subtle dread of going into my own living room. On Monday, I worked from home, but I couldn't avoid the painting. At noon, sunlight poured in, and the painting's expression seemed normal. The background was a dark, brownish color. The face was pale, with fine brushstrokes around the cheekbones. The eyes were a greenish-brown, and the eyebrows had a slight arch. While typing on my laptop, I felt someone watching me. I turned around and stared at the painting. It looked unchanged, but I felt a strange pressure in my chest. My breathing grew shallow, and my fingers trembled. I told myself to ignore it. That evening, I tried to relax with a few episodes of a comedy show, but I couldn't focus. My attention kept drifting to the painting. The corners of his mouth looked different again, this time with a slight downturn, almost like a frown. I paused the show, got up, and walked over. I leaned in close. The brush strokes around his lips hadn't changed, but the expression had definitely shifted. My skin crawled. I decided to cover the painting with an old blanket. As soon as I did, I let out a long exhale and my shoulders relaxed. I left it covered for 2 days. During that time, I slept better, but I couldn't stop. On Thursday afternoon, curiosity got the best of me. I removed the blanket. It was broad daylight, and I felt safer. I stood there studying the painting. It looked static again, the man's face neutral. I thought maybe I had exaggerated everything in my head. I decided to keep it uncovered just to prove I could handle it. That night, the tension returned. Around 10 p.m., I walked through the living room and glanced at the painting. It seemed unchanged, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me. The room felt heavier and the air thicker. I wasn't sure how much longer I could ignore it. At this point, I'm trying to figure out how to handle it. I know the painting is locked away in storage, but the feeling hasn't left my house. Sometimes I feel a presence in the living room, and the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I haven't slept well in weeks, my appetite is off, and I keep checking the living room wall, half expecting to see a faint outline of that face staring back at me. I don't believe in curses or haunted objects. I've never been fond of ghost stories, but I'm out of logical explanations. I can't deny the changes I saw in that painting. I know it sounds ridiculous. I understand most people wouldn't believe me, but I experienced every moment of it. I saw those eyes move. I saw the expression shift. And now, even though the painting isn't here, it feels like something still lingers. I might take it far away, maybe to another town, and leave it there, but I worry that won't solve anything. Right now, I'm sitting in my living room, writing this down on my laptop. It's getting late, and the street lamp outside is flickering. I keep glancing at the spot where the painting used to hang, half expecting to see it again. My body is tense, my breathing shallow, and I hear every small creak of the house. My eyes burn from lack of sleep. I'm hoping that by writing this, I can regain some sense of control. My plan is to get up early tomorrow, drive to the storage unit, and figure out what to do next. I don't want to bring it back home, and I don't want anyone else to deal with it either. But I can't keep living like this. I'm scared that if I don't deal with it, this feeling will never go away. I have no intention of harming myself or anyone else. I just need closure. I need to free my mind from this grip. I wish I could say it was all in my imagination, but I can't unsee what I saw. I can't forget the way those eyes glowed in the dark. I can't ignore the tapping, the tension that never really goes away. That painting changed my home. It changed my sleep. It changed my sense of what's real. Right now, I'm just hoping that locking it away, far from here, will help me move on. I can't handle another night with that face staring back at me. I can't handle another day feeling like it's always right behind me, waiting to show itself. That's why I'm telling this story, to remind myself that I'm still in control, or at least I'm trying. The moment I woke up in that dark hotel room, I knew something was off. I felt eyes on me from the corner. My chest tightened, and I could hear my own breathing. I blinked a few times, trying to focus on whatever might be there. I saw the chair against the wall, the old upholstered chair I remembered seeing when I first walked in. I couldn't see anyone, but the hairs on my arms stood up. I stayed still for a few seconds, wondering if I was imagining things. My throat was dry. I reached over to the small lamp on the bedside table, turned it on, and looked at the chair again. It was empty, just a piece of furniture, but it was turned at an angle I didn't remember. That small detail made my heart race. I sat up, rubbing my face. I told myself I was tired, that maybe I had moved the chair without remembering. I pulled the blanket off, got up, and walked over to the chair. The floor creaked with every step. I touched the back of the chair, trying to move it back to where I thought it had been. I stood there, feeling silly, but at least I knew for sure no one was there. I glanced around the room again. Everything seemed normal. I flicked the light off again and climbed back into bed, telling myself to calm down. This trip had been a last-minute thing. My boss had asked me to attend a conference in a small town a few hours away. I searched online for a place to stay, and although the city had modern hotels, they were all booked or too expensive. Then I found this old-fashioned hotel, with a big wooden door and a lobby that seemed like it hadn't changed in decades. I arrived earlier that day and checked in at the front desk. The man who gave me my key was polite but distant. He handed me a physical key attached to a small wooden tag. I remember walking down the hallway, noticing the old wallpaper, the creaking floorboards, and the dim lighting. It smelled faintly of furniture polish and stale air. My room was near the end of the door squeaked when I opened it, and the overhead light was weak, so the room seemed shadowy, even with the lights on. I didn't sense anything strange at first. I took a quick shower, changed into casual clothes, and went out for dinner. When I came back to the hotel, I felt an odd chill in the hallway. I checked my phone to see if the air conditioner was running, but there were no visible vents. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just cold outside and the building didn't have proper insulation. I passed a few other guests in the hall. They nodded, and I nodded back, but nobody seemed eager to chat. I went into my room, locked the door, and got ready for bed. I turned off the lights around 11. As far as I remember, I drifted off to sleep without any problem. That was until I woke up with that strange feeling that someone was watching me. My pulse raced as I tried to settle back into bed. After checking the chair, I felt the sheets against my leg. They were cold, and the pillow under my head felt damp, maybe from the humidity in the room. I kept my eyes closed, trying to force myself to relax. Eventually, I dozed off again, but it didn't last. My bladder woke me up around 2 or 3 a.m. I got up, disoriented for a moment, and flipped on the bathroom light. After using the toilet and washing my hands, I heard something from the bedroom. At first, I thought it was just a distant sound from outside or another room, but it didn't sound like typical hotel noise. It was more like a soft shuffle, almost a shuffle that wasn't quite silent. I stepped out of the bathroom, crossed the threshold into the bedroom, and the light from the bathroom illuminated part of the bed and side table. That's when I saw something wet on the headboard, dark patches that reflected the faint light. At first, I thought maybe I had spilled water earlier, but I hadn't used any water near the bed. I walked closer and realized the marks looked like handprints, or something shaped like damp impression. The wood finish was shiny where the moisture touched it, and there was no other water anywhere else. My stomach twisted, and my knees went weak. I reached out and touched one of the marks with the tip of my finger. It was cold. I dried my finger on my shorts, trying to think of a logical explanation. Maybe it was a leak from the ceiling, but the ceiling was completely dry. Maybe I had put my hands there after washing them, but I didn't remember doing that, and the marks looked like two distinct prints on either side of the headboard. I stood there for a few seconds, grabbed a tissue from the desk, and tried to wipe the marks off. The moisture came away easily, leaving no stain, but my chest still felt tight. I looked around, trying to see if there were any other spots of moisture. The walls were dry, the sheets were dry, and the chair was still in the corner, facing the bed. But now it was angled a little differently, almost like it had turned toward me even more. I stared at it for a moment, wondering if I was imagining things or if it really had moved. My heart raced, and I gritted my teeth, then stepped over to it. I placed my hands on the armrests and turned the chair back to face the wall, pushing it flush with the corner. Once I'd moved it, I walked back to the bed, climbed under the covers, and pulled them up to my chest. I left the bathroom light on this time. Trying to stay still, I noticed my breathing coming in quick bursts, and my heart pounded in my chest. Sweat began to form on my temples. Then I heard it, a soft humming, right near my ear. It wasn't a tune I recognized, and I couldn't make out the words, if there were any. It was just a gentle sound, almost pleasant, but something about it told me it shouldn't be there. My throat went dry and my hands started shaking. I turned my head to the side, expecting to see someone crouching by my bed, but there was nothing. My eyes darted around the room, first the nightstand, then the window, then back to the chair in the corner. It was still in place. I propped myself up on my elbows, scanning the room. The humming faded, or maybe it stopped the moment I sat up. All I could hear now was my own pulse thudding in my head. I swallowed hard, trying to calm myself. Reaching over, I grabbed the room phone and dialed the front desk, but no one picked up. It didn't surprise me, considering the hour. I put the phone down, trying to slow my breathing. I told myself it was probably just some leftover dream fragment, something from my half-awake state. But it felt too real. I grabbed my cell phone from the nightstand and checked the time. It was 3:12 a.m. My signal was weak, but I considered calling a friend or coworker just to hear a familiar voice. Then I realized I'd sound ridiculous. I put the phone back down, deciding instead to get some water, hoping it would help me relax. Not wanting to walk all the way to the lobby to find a vending machine, I turned on the small coffee maker on top of the desk. I filled the pot with water from the bathroom sink, poured it into the machine, and switched it on. Standing there, waiting for the water to heat up, I had a moment to gather my thoughts. The hum of the little machine was oddly comforting, mechanical, a normal sound, unlike the soft humming I'd heard near my ear. Once the water was hot, I poured myself a cup of plain water and sipped it, standing in my boxers and t-shirt, the bathroom light still on behind me. I stared at the bed, then at the chair in the corner, half expecting it to swivel around on its own. After finishing my water, I turned off the coffee maker and flicked the bathroom light off. The room went dark again, except for the faint glow from the street light outside. I climbed back into bed, staring at the ceiling. The old pipes in the walls made occasional popping sounds. The wooden beams creaked, but there was no more humming. I tried to keep my eyes open, watching for any movement, but exhaustion. Eventually, my eyelids grew heavy, and I drifted off. I woke again when I felt something brush against my arm, a slight pressure, then it was gone. I jerked upright, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I sat there, breathing fast, scanning the room. Nothing. The door was still closed, the curtains drawn, and the chair was still in the corner. I reached for the lamp and switched it on, bathing the room in dull yellow light. I looked at my arm, no mark. The sheets were undisturbed. I checked the alarm clock on the nightstand. It was a little after 5 a.m. I decided I was done trying to sleep. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, slipped on my shoes, and made my way to the shower. The water ran hot, and as I stepped under the spray, I was half expecting to hear that humming again. But all I heard was the rush of water. My shoulders slowly relaxed. I thought maybe I could get through the rest of the morning without anything else strange happening. After drying off and getting dressed, I looked around the room. The wet handprints were gone, the sheets only slightly rumpled, and the chair remained in its corner. I started packing my bag. My conference wasn't supposed to start until 9, but I wanted to get out of that hotel as soon as possible. I felt uncomfortable, and I just wanted to leave. I shoved my clothes into my suitcase, zipped it up, and walked to the door. But then I paused. Part of me was worried that if I walked out, I might see something behind me in the mirror or catch a glimpse of movement. I shook it off, opened the door, and stepped into the quiet hallway. My suitcase clicked over the uneven floor as I walked to the lobby. When I got to the front desk, no one was there. I rang the small bell and waited. Eventually, an older woman appeared from a back office. She asked if I was checking out, and I nodded, handing her the key. She asked if everything was okay. I lied and said it was fine. I didn't feel like telling her about the chair, the wet handprints, or the humming. I just wanted to leave. She typed into the computer for a moment, then handed me the bill. I glanced at it, paid with my credit card, and took the receipt. She wished me a good day, and I nodded, leaving the hotel. Outside, the sun was barely up, and the air felt cool against my face. I walked to my car, tossed my suitcase into the trunk, and got in. The inside of the car smelled familiar. I gripped the steering wheel, exhaled, and realized my hands were still shaking. I tried to breathe slowly, then started the engine and pulled away from the hotel. I watched it shrink in my rearview mirror, an old structure with a fading sign. I thought about the strange experiences I had that night, wondering if I was just exhausted or if I had vivid nightmares. But I remembered the chair, those wet prints, and that voice. I felt a slight shiver run down my back. I turned on the radio for distraction, the music filling the car as I focused on the road ahead. I arrived at the conference center earlier than expected. I parked and sat in my car for a few minutes, my mind returning to that hotel room. I wanted to push it out of my head and focus on the day ahead, but I kept replaying each moment, the feeling of being watched, and the strange things I had heard. I wasn't sure how to explain it. The feeling of being watched, the wet handprints, the soft humming near my ear, that brief brush on my arm. I took a deep breath, got out of the car, and walked into the building. I decided not to tell anyone about it. It was too strange, and I figured they'd just laugh or assume I was stressed from work. I signed in at the registration desk, found a seat, and tried to let the usual conference routines distract me. People around me made small talk, sipped coffee, and scrolled through their phones. I nodded hello to a few colleagues, and when my boss arrived, he asked if I was okay. I just said I was tired. He shrugged and told me to get some rest later. The day went by slowly. I attended panels and took notes, but my thoughts kept drifting. I couldn't stop thinking about that soft humming. Occasionally, I felt an itch on my arm, like something brushing against it, but every time I glanced down, there was nothing there. By the time the conference ended that afternoon, I packed up my materials and drove straight home. I didn't stop for lunch or anything else. On the ride back, I kept replaying everything in my head. I still didn't have an explanation for what had happened. A strange tension lingered in my shoulders, and my eyes were tired, but I felt a little better once I was away from that old place. When I finally got home, I unlocked the front door, dragged my suitcase inside, and dropped it in the hallway. The quiet of my own house felt safe. I walked into the living room, sank onto the couch, and tried to calm my nerves. I haven't gone back to that hotel, and I don't plan. My boss asked me for feedback on the trip, and I just said the conference was fine and the hotel was old-fashioned. I have a feeling I'll never book a room there again. Even now, sometimes late at night, I think about that voice humming. I can almost hear it if I let my mind wander. It wasn't threatening, just there in the darkness, making my skin crawl. I can't explain any of it. I don't know if there's a reasonable explanation for those wet handprints, but I know what I felt, and I know it felt real. That's all I can say. I'm staying away from old hotels for a while. That night was enough for me. The next time I went running, it was a rainy afternoon. I was out in the park, doing my usual route. The rain had soaked the pavement, and I focused on my breathing, trying not to slip. I noticed someone standing near a bench. I couldn't see their face, as they seemed to be covered by a dripping piece of cloth. The moment I slowed down, that shape vanished, but the cloth remained, hovering. My chest tightened, and I blinked to make sure I wasn't imagining things. Then I felt a blast of cold air across my neck. There was no wind. I turned around, finding only my shoes sloshing in the puddles. The cloth dropped onto the bench and slid to the ground. I walked over, crouched, and picked it up. It was warm and dry, like it had just come out of a dryer. My hand started shaking, and I set it down quickly. I looked around, but I was alone. When I turned back, the cloth was gone. From that day on, whenever it rained, I sensed it around me, like it was watching me, lingering between the trees. I want to explain how it all started, to lay it out in detail, because it didn't stop with that first encounter. I was just an ordinary guy running in the rain. I run in that park a lot, no matter the weather. I like how quiet it is when it rains. Most people stay away. That day, it was mid-afternoon. The sky was dull. Everything looked gray. My shoes squeaked and rainwater slipped off my cap. I had earbuds in, but they weren't playing music, just to block out some of the noise. I remember hearing the rain hitting the leaves and the faint splashing sound each time I took a step. Then I noticed the figure near the bench. The bench was about 20 feet off the path where I usually run. The figure was hunched over, covered by something thin. Water ran off it like a small waterfall around the shoulders. I felt a tingling at the back of my neck. Maybe someone was hurt or waiting for help. I slowed down, pulled my earbuds out, and called out, "Hey, are you okay?" I didn't get a response. The rain started coming down heavier, so I stepped off the path and onto the grass. My feet sank into the muddy ground as I moved closer, trying not to slip. My shirt clung to my chest and my breath came short. Something felt off. I heard water splashing against the bench, but no wind or rustling branches. Then I looked up, and the figure was gone. It didn't run away. It simply wasn't there anymore. But the cloth, still hovering, floated at my stomach twisted, and I took a step back. The cloth moved side to side, and then I felt a cold rush of air across my shoulders. My skin tightened, and I gasped. I looked around, searching for a gust of wind, but there was nothing. It was like a pocket of cold air washed over me for just a second, and then the cloth dropped onto the bench, sliding to the ground. I stepped closer, feeling a sense of dread. What was I looking at? I stood there for a few seconds, unsure whether to touch it. I finally reached down and picked it up with 2 fingers. It was dry, completely dry, and warm, as though it had just been taken out of a dryer. I stood there, holding it in my hands, feeling the warmth seep into my skin. I ran my thumbs across the surface. It was smooth, thinner than a typical scarf, and it felt almost alive. My heart raced. I was soaking wet, yet the cloth felt warm and dry. Then I turned my head again. For a moment, I stood still, checking to see if anyone was around. But there wasn't a soul in sight. When I looked back at my hands, the cloth was gone. I'm not sure if I dropped it or if it vanished, but all I knew was that my hands were empty. The rain on my skin felt freezing after the warmth I'd just felt. I ran home faster than usual that day. My clothes were soaked and my legs shook with every step. When I got to my apartment, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that cloth and could still feel its warmth in my hands. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the light, or maybe that I was just exhausted, but I couldn't forget that cold blast of air or the way the material felt when I touched it. The next day, I almost skipped my run. I was on edge, but I forced myself to go. The weather was decent, and I hoped everything would be back to normal. I ran my usual route. The sky was clear, and when I spotted the same bench from a distance, I slowed down, approached it, and found nothing strange. No sign that anything had happened the day before. My shoulders relaxed, and I felt my face warm up. I guess I was a little embarrassed for spooking myself. But as the days passed, I started noticing a pattern. Every time it rained, I felt uneasy, like someone was standing behind me, watching. I began looking over my shoulder a lot. Sometimes I saw a hint of white between the trees. Sometimes I saw movement near a lamppost. I tried to get closer, but the shape always disappeared. The next clear sighting happened about 2 weeks later, another rainy afternoon. I was running in a hooded jacket, having left my cap at home. The wind had picked up, so I was more aware of the weather. I felt the rain on my face and heard the branches creaking in the wind. The thud of my footsteps echoed on the pavement. After about 10 minutes, I passed by a row of tall bushes, and my gut tightened. There it was again, the cloth shape, hovering behind the bushes. It seemed to float about a foot off the ground. I stopped and stared, my breathing growing heavier. I felt my pulse thumping in my wrists as I took a few slow steps closer, squishing wet leaves beneath my feet. The shape vanished before I could get around the bushes. I whispered to myself, "What the hell?" Realizing I was alone, talking to no one, I stood frozen. The bushes shook a bit, but the wind wasn't strong enough to cause that. My hands started to sweat, even though it was cold. I waited a few more seconds, but nothing appeared. Then I turned back toward the main path and finished my run in a hurry. At home, I dried off, ate dinner, and tried to focus on other things. But my mind kept drifting back to that hovering shape. I began changing my schedule. Sometimes I ran in the morning, sometimes late at night, but I couldn't avoid the rain forever. The sightings became more frequent. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of it under a tree or near a different bench. It always looked the same, a piece of cloth draped in the air, watching me. It never came closer than about 15 or 20 feet. Each time, I could feel a tug in my chest, like my instincts were screaming at me to leave. One evening, I decided to confront it. The sky was full of dark clouds, and rain started falling in large droplets. I had my phone in my pocket, ready to capture whatever it was. I ran straight to the spot where I'd first seen it. At first, there was nothing there. I jogged around, scanning every tree and every bench. After 20 minutes, I was soaked. My shoes made slapping sounds with each step, and my jacket was dripping at the sleeves. Then I spotted it near a small pond. It was floating above a metal bench that faced the water. My heart pounded in my chest as I moved closer, trying not to think too hard. I got within 10 feet of it. The cloth shifted slightly, like it was being lifted by invisible hands. It wasn't touching the bench. It was hanging in the air. I raised my phone to take a picture, but when I tapped the screen, it was gone. The cloth had vanished, leaving only the bench and the pond in my phone's view. I felt a wave of unease rush over me. The hair on my arm stood up. I looked around, but I didn't see anyone. The rain dripped off my hood and ran down my face. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the bench, then jogged out of there, my lungs burning. That night, I lay awake, feeling numb. I replayed the moment when I tried to take the picture, unable to understand why the cloth disappeared so quickly. I wanted answers, but didn't know who to ask. I considered talking to a friend about it, but I didn't want them to think I was imagining things. I tried to forget about it for a few days, but the rain returned, and so did the sightings. Sometimes I would just catch a glimpse of the white shape between the trees. Other times, it would appear near a distant path. A few times, I heard a faint sound, like air escaping through a small gap. It reminded me of a quiet. I didn't know if it came from the cloth or from somewhere else. For a moment I stood there, checking to see if anyone was around, but there wasn't a soul in sight. When I looked back at my hands, the cloth was gone. I wasn't sure if I dropped it or if it vanished, but my hands were empty. The rain on my skin felt freezing after the warmth of the cloth. I ran home that day faster than usual, my clothes soaked and my legs trembling. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that cloth and could still feel its warmth in my hands. I tried to tell myself it was just a trick of the light, or that I was simply exhausted, but I couldn't forget that cold rush of air or how the material felt in my grasp. The next day, I almost skipped my run. I was on edge, but I forced myself to go. The weather was decent, and I hoped everything would feel normal again. I ran the usual route, and when I spotted the same bench from a distance, I slowed down and approached it. There was nothing strange this time. No cloth, no no sign of anything unusual. My shoulders relaxed and my face warmed with relief. I guess I was a little embarrassed for spooking myself. But as the days passed, I began to notice a pattern. Every time it rained, I felt uneasy, as though someone was standing behind me, watching. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. Sometimes I saw a hint of white between the trees, or a fleeting movement near a lamppost. But every time I tried to get closer, the shape would vanish. 2 weeks later, on another rainy afternoon, I was running in a hooded jacket. This time, I'd left my cap at home. The wind had picked up, and I was more aware of the weather. The rain pelted my face, and I heard branches creaking in the distance. My footsteps echoed as I ran. After about 10 minutes, I passed a row of tall bushes. That's when I saw it again. The cloth hovering behind the bushes, about a foot off the ground. My heart raced. I stopped, my breathing growing heavy. I felt my pulse in my wrists as I moved closer, careful not to slip. The shape vanished before I could get around the bushes. I whispered, "What the hell?" realizing I was talking to myself. The bushes shook slightly, but the wind wasn't strong enough to cause that. My hands were sweating, even though it was cold. I stood there for a few seconds, but nothing appeared. Then, I turned back toward the main path and finished my run in a hurry. At home, I dried off, ate dinner, and tried to focus on other things. But my mind kept drifting back to that hovering shape. I changed my routine. Sometimes I ran in the morning, sometimes late at night. But I couldn't escape the rain. The sightings grew more frequent. Sometimes I'd see it under a tree or near a bench. Always the same, a piece of cloth, hanging in midair, watching me. It never came closer than about 15 or 20 feet. Each time, I felt a pull in my chest, my instincts screaming at me to leave. One evening, I decided to confront. The sky was heavy with dark clouds, and the rain started to fall in large droplets. I had my phone ready, thinking I could capture whatever it was. I ran straight to the spot where I'd first seen the cloth. At first, nothing was there. I jogged around, scanning every tree and bench. After 20 minutes, I was soaked, my shoes slapping against the wet pavement. Then, I spotted it again, near a small pond. The cloth was hovering above a metal bench that faced the water. I moved closer, trying to ignore the fear in my chest. My heart was pounding, and my mouth was dry. As I got within 10 feet of it, I saw the cloth shift, as if it were being lifted by invisible hands. It wasn't touching the bench, it was hanging in midair. I raised my phone to take a picture, but when I tapped the screen, it vanished. The cloth was gone, and my phone only captured the empty bench and the pond. My skin prickled, and I looked around, but there was no one. The rain dripped off my hood and ran down my face. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the bench, then jogged out of there, my lungs burning. That night, I lay awake, feeling numb. I kept replaying the moment when I tried to take a picture. I couldn't understand why it disappeared so quickly. I wanted answers, but I didn't know who to ask. I thought about talking to a friend, but I didn't want them to think I was imagining things. I tried to forget about it for a few days, but the rain came back, and so did the sightings. Sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of the white shape between the trees. Other times, it would appear near a distant path. A few times, I heard a faint sound, like air escaping through a small gap. It reminded me of a quiet hiss. I didn't know if it came from the cloth or somewhere else. I kicked the door until a sharp pain shot through my foot. I limped away, but the door didn't show a single crack. Exhausted, I finally gave up and went back to bed. I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with thoughts, each one more frantic than the last. I tried to calm myself by telling myself it could be a rat or something caught behind the wall. But I'd never heard a rat sound like that. I felt uneasy, but I managed to shut my eyes for a few hours. The next day, I walked around the house, checking every possible entrance or hidden space I might have missed. I examined the outside walls and the roof, but I found nothing. No windows or boarded-up openings. Everything looked normal. No gaps, no hidden vents. I even used a flashlight to search for cracks in the attic walls, but it was pointless. A knot formed in my stomach. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation, but my instincts screamed that something else was happening. That evening, I heard voices for the first time. I was in the living room when I heard a muffled sound from upstairs. I froze. My arms felt cold, my stomach churned. Slowly, I stood up and walked to the staircase. That's when I heard it. My name. It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough to make me stop in my tracks. The dread spread from my chest to my throat. My heart raced so fast I could feel each beat thundering in my head. I forced myself to climb the stairs, gripping the railing tightly to steady myself. When I reached the attic door, the voices seemed to quiet down. I pressed my ear to the wood. For a few seconds, all I could hear was my own breathing. Then I heard it again. My name, whispered, pleading. It sounded as if someone was pressed against the door. I didn't know what to do. My palms were sweating and my knees felt weak. I knocked softly. "Who's there?" I called. There was a long pause before the whisper came again, asking me to open the door. I tried pushing on the wood, but it was locked as usual. I yelled back that I couldn't unlock it, but the whisper didn't stop. It kept repeating my name, growing more desperate. I ran downstairs and grabbed a flashlight and a small camera. I wanted to record the sounds in case I was imagining. When I returned to the attic, the voice was still there. I pressed record on the camera, but the playback didn't capture much. Just some faint static, but no voice. That made me feel even more uneasy. My body was on edge. Every muscle felt taut, as if bracing for something to jump out. Over the next few days, the voice grew louder. It would call out to me at random times, sometimes during the afternoon, sometimes in the middle of the night. Whenever I went up to the attic, a cold draft would seep through the door and the hairs on my arms would stand on end. I started keeping a small space heater in the attic, hoping it would change the temperature, but it didn't. The door area remained cold, no matter what. One evening, I put my ear against the wood again and noticed a faint breeze passing through. It felt icy against my skin. I ran my hand along the edges, hoping to find a gap or crack, but the wood felt solid. On the 5th day, the voice sounded more urgent. It asked me to help, saying it was trapped. I asked if it was a person, but it didn't give a direct answer. It just kept begging me to open the door. I pushed against the wood again, and this time I felt a slight vibration, as though something was pushing back from the other side. I put all my weight into it, my muscles straining, but it was no use. The door didn't move. After a while, I started feeling restless. I didn't like being alone in the house. I kept the lights on and turned the TV up loud, but every now and then, I'd hear footsteps overhead, right above me in the attic. I'd rush upstairs, stand in front of the door, and listen. Sometimes I'd hear scraping. Other times, there was nothing. My nerves were shot. I started thinking about moving out, but the thought of leaving this unresolved made me uneasy. It was my house, after all, and I felt responsible. I worried that something was locked in there, something that didn't belong in a normal room. I even tried to hire a professional locksmith, even though there was no visit. He came over, examined the door, tapped on different spots, and used some tools. After a while, he shrugged and said he couldn't do anything. There was no mechanism to pick or remove. He said the door was sealed shut in a way he'd never seen before. He suggested I call a contractor to break down the wall around the door. That idea lingered in my mind, but it also filled me with dread, like I was about to unleash something I wouldn't understand. The next night, the voice sounded angry. It repeated my name, but this time the tone made my neck tense up. I felt a pressure in my head, like a headache building up. I told it to stop. I actually shouted, "Leave me alone," out loud, but it didn't stop. It kept calling my name, louder now, until I shouted back. My voice echoed in the attic, and then everything went quiet. I sat there for a few minutes, staring at the door. My hands were shaking, and my heart was hammering in my chest. The door remained still. By the 8th night, I started hearing knocking from the other side. It was slow, like a single tap repeated every few seconds. My body reacted with fear, but I also felt frustrated. I shouted that I couldn't open it, and the knocking got faster. I slammed my fist against the door, but it felt useless. Eventually, the knocking stopped. I just stood there, staring at the door, my breath coming in short bursts. I decided I had to do something drastic. I went to the garage, grabbed a sledgehammer, and rushed back upstairs to the attic. I stood at the edge of the door frame and swung the hammer at the drywall. The sound was deafening, and bits of plaster and dust flew everywhere. I covered my mouth with my sleeve and kept hitting the wall. After 5 swings, I had made a hole big enough to see inside. I aimed my flashlight into the hole. I saw the wooden boards that made up the side of the sealed room. I slammed the hammer against it again, but it barely dented. I tried hitting at different angles, my arms burning and my lungs tight from the dust. After 10 minutes, the hole was bigger, but there was still no opening into the sealed room. I dropped the hammer and stepped back, out of breath. I left the hole in the wall, hoping that I'd discover a weak spot later. But the next morning, it remained unchanged, just a hole leading to another barrier. I felt a sense of defeat. The voice was quiet that day. I didn't hear my name, or knocking, or scratching. I almost felt relieved, but the paranoia lingered, like something was waiting for the right moment. On the 10th night, I heard it. The door itself moved. The sound was distinct, like wood scraping against wood. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. I grabbed my flashlight and ran upstairs, only to find the attic door cracked open by a fraction of an inch. The cold draft hit me before I even reached it. My hand trembled as I reached for the edge of the door, pushing. It didn't open any further. I pulled, but it wouldn't budge. It was like it had moved on its own, just enough to form a thin gap. I peered through with my flashlight, but all I could see was darkness. The air smelled stale, and my eyes began to water from the dust. I grabbed a screwdriver, trying to pry the door open, but the wood didn't give. Then I heard it, a faint whisper right in my ear. I jerked back so quickly I nearly dropped the flashlight. The whisper repeated my name, this time sounding weaker, as if struggling to speak. I stepped away from the door, breathing hard, waiting to see if it would move again. It didn't. It stayed stuck at that small opening. I spent the next few hours pacing around the attic, shining my flashlight on the door, but the gap never widened. Finally, I went downstairs, made some coffee, and tried to calm myself. My mind was racing with thoughts about what could be behind that door. I didn't want to deal with it anymore, but I knew I had. It was either that or leave my own house. Later that same night, I stood in front of the attic door again, my arms heavy, my feet cold. I had the sledgehammer in my hand, but I couldn't bring myself to swing it. The door was still cracked open. I leaned my ear toward it and heard breathing, a faint, shallow sound, like someone was standing just on the other side. I backed up until I was at the top of the attic stairs, watching the gap, half expecting something to slip through. By dawn, I was still there. Nothing came out, and the door never opened further. I went to my bedroom, exhausted, but my mind wouldn't let me sleep. Every small noise in the house made me jump. My muscles were tense, and I couldn't get comfortable. I lay there, imagining the door swinging open on its own. It's been a few days now, and the door remains exactly the same, slightly ajar. I still hear the occasional whisper, and the cold air still seeps. Sometimes I see the door shift a bit, as if it's trying to open wider. I sit there, watching it, waiting to see if it will finally open on its own. Part of me wants to rush at it, to break it down, but another part of me wants to seal it shut with planks and never go near it again. I'm stuck in this uneasy balance. Every time I walk up to that door, I feel my heart pounding and my breathing getting unsteady. I keep a flashlight and a crowbar nearby, just in case. I haven't slept well since the scratching started. My dreams are full of images of me stepping inside that hidden room, unable to get out. I don't know what's behind there, and at this point I'm not sure I want to find out, but I also can't ignore it. Sometimes I stand in front of the attic door, telling it to open if it wants out so badly. But it never does, not completely. It just stays stuck, mocking me with that small gap. There's this fear gnawing at me. One day, I'll wake up and the door will be wide open. I won't be able to handle what's inside. But there's another fear too, that I'll never know, and I'll live with this tension forever. I have no idea which outcome is worse. All I can do is wait and keep my eyes on that gap, hoping I'll be ready if it finally opens. I felt something was off the moment I turned the corner onto my usual street. That night, everything looked the same at first glance. Familiar houses, the same sidewalk, and the uneven patches of concrete. But something felt different, as if the blocks were stretched out. I didn't want to believe it, but with every step, that uneasy feeling grew. My palms started sweating, and I hadn't even walked more than a few yards. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't shake the sense that I was entering a place I didn't quite recognize anymore. I usually walk home from the bus stop after work. It's a quiet neighborhood with simple one-story houses, small front yards, and a few streetlights that flicker every now and then. The sidewalk is narrow, and some parts of the road have small cracks. On normal nights, I can see the end of the street after just a few blocks. There's a corner store near the intersection with a bright sign that usually tells me I'm almost home. That night, I didn't see the sign. Instead, I saw a single streetlight about 2 blocks away, flickering a pale yellow light. It caught my attention. It felt like a signal, but I couldn't figure out why. My gut told me to focus on that light, so I kept walking toward it. As I got closer, the lamp blinked on and off, making everything around it look like a stop-motion scene. Bright one moment, dark the next. When I finally reached the pole, I realized I had walked farther than I usually did. The street didn't match my usual landmarks. My house should have been just another block away, but I still couldn't see it. Instead, I saw another streetlight in the distance, also flickering. I looked back over my shoulder, hoping to see the bus stop or something else to ground me, but the bus stop was way too far. It was like I'd walked half a mile, not just 2 blocks. A jolt of nervous energy shot through my chest. My heart raced, and I heard my breath coming out quick and shallow. The air felt colder than usual, and the pavement beneath my feet seemed damp. I kept walking, reasoning that maybe I was just tired, not paying attention. But the flickering lamp drew my eyes again. It was like the only beacon in the darkness, so I aimed for it, hoping it would lead me home. I thought I'd eventually see my block, or at least a familiar house, but when I reached the second flickering lamp, I stopped. I realized I was standing in front of a house I'd never noticed before. The fence was run down, and a mailbox hung crooked, rusted on its hinge. The windows were dark, and there was no car in the driveway. There were no sounds, no voices or TV sets inside. It was just empty. My stomach turned, and I felt goosebumps along my arms. I checked my phone, hoping to call someone, but there was no signal. Normally, I have at least 2 bars in this area, but that night, the phone had nothing. No service, no data, nothing. I thought about turning around and trying a different street, but something in the back of my mind told me that turning around wouldn't fix anything. I took a few steps forward and heard a strange scraping sound. It reminded me of metal dragging across pavement. I froze. The sound seemed distant, but also echoed through the empty street. I stared at the dark pavement, expecting to see a knocked-over trash can or an old shopping cart, but there was nothing. My eyes scanned the street ahead. It was silent, except for that sporadic scraping noise. I glanced behind me, but all I saw were the empty houses and the flickering lampposts stretching back the way I had come. That's when I realized I might be stuck in some kind of loop. It sounds ridiculous, but each time I reached a flickering streetlight, another one would appear farther ahead, blinking on and off like a signal. The rest of the street was either too dark to make out or stretched into some kind of void. My breathing grew faster and my chest tightened. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to walk quicker. I told myself that if I kept going, I'd eventually hit the main road or see my own block. My mouth was dry, and every time my shoes scuffed the sidewalk, I jumped. I kept track of the houses on my left and right. They all looked the same, small, old, and dark. Some had peeling paint, others broken fences. None showed signs of life. No lights in the windows, no parked cars with interior lights on, no movement behind curtains. The only sounds were my footsteps and that strange scraping noise. I reached another flickering lamppost and paused underneath it, taking a moment to catch my breath. My heart was pounding and my forehead felt damp. The light above me pulsed in a slow rhythm, on, off, on, off. I pulled my phone out again, but still no signal. I turned it off and on, but nothing changed. I felt more alone than ever. The silence around me was overwhelming. I thought about knocking on one of the doors, but something about the stillness made that idea feel dangerous. I didn't want to see what might open the door. I didn't want to find out if there was someone or something inside. I stood there, debating my next move. Should I go back or keep going forward? My gut told me not to look back anymore. It was like there was a warning in the air, a message that turning around would be a mistake. So I took a few more steps forward. The next flickering lamppost appeared about a block ahead, just like before. As I walked, the scraping sound of chains grew louder. It made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I scanned the road ahead, trying to see if anything was there, but I saw nothing. No shapes, no figures, just empty streets. Still, the sound persisted. Sometimes close, sometimes distant, but always around. My pulse hammered in my ears. Sweat trickled down my back, and my legs began to feel weak. I kept swallowing, trying to relieve the dryness in my mouth. There was a moment when I thought I saw something move near a fence line. A shadow flickered across the ground in the corner of my vision. I stopped walking and turned my head, but all I saw was the side of a house. Nothing moved. The noise faded a bit. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. My lungs felt tight, and I breathed in short bursts. Keep it together, I told myself. It's just your mind playing tricks. But I couldn't calm down. I passed 2 more blocks, each marked by a flickering light post. My body felt drained, like I'd been walking for hours. My legs ached and my shoulders felt stiff. I kept glancing behind me, even though I knew I shouldn't. Each time the street looked empty, just a stretch of asphalt with flickering lights receding into the distance. It felt like looking into a distorted mirror of the street ahead. No matter which direction I looked, it felt endless. I decided to try something different. I turned left at the next intersection, hoping I could cut through a side street and reach a main road. But that street looked dark and uninviting. I saw a single lamppost flickering at the far end, just like the others. The houses on that block had the same look: dark windows, closed doors, no signs of life. But I walked down it anyway, desperate for a change of scenery. The chain sounds echoed again, sharper and more frequent this time. It felt like they were following me, pacing me, waiting for me to slip up. As I continued down the side street, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. For a split second, I thought I'd gotten a signal. Maybe someone was calling me. I fumbled to grab my phone. The screen showed a notification symbol, but it vanished in an instant. Then the phone went back to having no signal. It was like something was teasing me. I stared at the device for a few seconds before shoving it back into my pocket, cursing under. I stepped onto a patch of sidewalk that was uneven, and my foot slipped,